Hello and welcome to our webinar today about getting your high-yielding dairy cows back in calf. I'm really pleased today that I'll be able to introduce to you a vet from Ireland, Nial O'Boyle, who's been busy working in America and got lots of experience to tell us about how he did it with 8,000 dairy cows, and they were yielding between 12,000 and 14,000 litres. First of all, we will just do a bit of housekeeping. And we mute everybody just to make sure that we don't get any background noise, barking dogs, postmen delivering Christmas parcels, that kind of thing. We will finish promptly at 1 o'clock, and this webinar is being recorded and you will be sent a link after the event. We will also send you a survey at the end, and we'd really appreciate it if you would give us some feedback to help us with the quality for our future webinars, and there will be some resources attached to that and some links to our in-calf materials. If you'd like to ask a question, we'd really like to encourage you to do so, and you can click the arrows to the right where you can see questions. Click the white arrow which opens the box and type your question in. They will be anonymous, nobody else will be able to see them, so please feel free to ask. We do have quite a few vets on the call today, but I would ask you please only to give us practical farming questions, as I'm not authorised to answer your technical veterinary ones. I'd just also like to tell you, if you're a dairy farmer levy payer, that we are encouraging everybody please to register so that you will be eligible to vote next year about how your levy is spent and all the different projects that we do. It's really important that we get some feedback from the key people who fund everything that we actually do, and registration is now open. You can register by contacting your local knowledge exchange manager. They will help you and send you the direct login, or you can just go straight onto our website and look for Shape the Future. So we shall now ask Nial to start. Nial's got a really good PowerPoint, so please ask questions as we go along and I'll read them out. Nial, please just tell us all about what you learned when you were working in America.
Yeah, thanks Shirley, thanks for having me along. Yeah, it was a really good experience in America. So I've qualified from Liverpool about 20 years ago in 2001, and I've spent roughly half that time in the UK and half the time in the US. And yeah, noticed a big change in just the reproduction performance. I'd like to say it was down to me, but obviously it wasn't. But just in the industry in the US, really was some really good increases, which I think I can see happening in a lot of UK dairies, but I think there's some areas where we could really learn from as well. Good. So they were, just a little bit background about the herds. So it was a family-owned group, milking about 75,000 in different regions in the Midwest. Most of them were what we call natural vents. So those are the ones we'd be familiar with, obviously a bit more wood, timber structured barns over there, sheds. But there also was these natural vents, and they would all be under one roof. So other ones would average 3,000 to 5,000. These types of sheds would be usually 5,000 to 7,000, 8,000 kind of structures. A lot of rotary parlors, parallel parlors, and recently going into robotic milking as well. But just the good thing about reproduction is it doesn't really matter if you're playing, in a large stadium or at your local park. The tools and the advice available and the learning can be applied to, the same on a football pitch at the Burnabout compared to your local park. So the object of the game is just to score a goal, and you've got the same equipment. So I did think about using rugby, but decided not to use rugby because I thought they're a bit more suited to beef cattle. Beef cattle are more robust, they're more likely to get results and need less pampering. I was going to put you have to deal with less crap. I wasn't sure if I was allowed, so didn't put that in. Okay, that's good. The big thing on reproduction in the US, and it's becoming, and it's quite widely adopted in all year-round calving herds in the UK, is preg rate. So pregnancy rate is the main KPI, and I would define that, or it's roughly defined as, those cows in a 21-day cycle that are eligible to be heat detected and get heat detected and become pregnant. It's not a perfect KPI, but the really good advantage of it is it focuses on two areas, which would be your heat detection rate and your conception rate, and they really drive pregnancies, but also it shows you deficiencies in either of those areas. A good interesting thing that somebody told me about KPIs is they're not always key indicators of performance. So that sounds a bit confusing, but their example was like Roger Bannister. They all thought the 4-minute mile was impossible, and I think it was 1954 he ran it. 4 months later, 2 others broke it, and now I think 1,400 people have beaten the 4-minute mile. So it's just there's some dangers of looking at your local KPIs and thinking, okay, well, I'm doing okay because I'm near the average or above the average. But if I look, over 20 years in the US, they've went from, I think the median preg rate in the UK now is 14%, with the top quartile doing 18%, where they've had a really good increase over the last 10 years or so. Whereas we used to look at 18% being good, you're targeting the high to mid 20s, where now, if you're not getting in the high 20s, you're really not performing as well as you could be. And there's some in the 35s, early 40s. I will just add a caveat, Shirley, on there's different ways of measuring preg rate or different programs. For example, Uniform, I think, run about 3% higher than Valley Ag software, which is Dairy Comp, which is the one I'd be more familiar with. There's also intricacies in how you calculate it as well. I think Dairy Comp can initiate this, and then different softwares have their different ways of calculating it. So also you can change it by changing your voluntary waiting period. So there's some caveats. You need to make sure you're always comparing apples with apples.
Need some consistency. I know we've called this one Getting High Yielding Cows Back in Calf because they are working hard, and we do just need to be looking after them really well. But what influence does all year round calving have on this?
I think the key difference, block calving obviously is more popular here and some other systems, but I don't think I think the same intensity and link with profitability to getting pregnancy is exactly the same on all year round calving herds. It's just, you just don't have the times of focus, but you have to keep that intensity up. It's just as important. If you look at the economic models and things, there's a bit of an argument over lactation lengths and high yielding, but the closer you can keep those peaks together, the more profitability time there is. There may be some on the, in the literature, there's a bit more evidence for first lactations given a longer lactation time or economically, but I don't think the jury's still out. And in my mind, you're better just really focusing on getting as many pregnancies as you can, as efficiently and quickly as you can. Okay,
and also we're talking about your experience with large herds. 8,000 cows is a lot of cows.
Yeah. It's the same principles. I suppose the same principles are there in what, the tools you have, what you need to do, what you need to focus on. So, and it's equally, from a 50 cow herd to a 5,000 cow herd, the principles and economic drivers are really equal.
Good. Right. Let's crack on then.
Okay. So yeah, I just kind of talk around 4 things that I felt was important in this kind of improvement in preg rate in our herds and just in a lot of neighbouring herds. Focus on dry matter intake, and I'll talk through that. Details, mainly focusing on conception rate, those little steps to get good conception rates. Heat detection is very important, and staff engagement for those of you that are employing staff is bringing them with you on that journey. Dry matter intake, I think probably second to managing staff, is the hardest thing to get right. I found managing the dairies. I looked at dry matter intakes per pen, per lactation, constantly every day. It's one of those things that, you could put out feed and they could run out feed in the morning, and you could, but to dial it in to get that balance where you're not running out too much, and you're not overfeeding. And there's also variables of weather effect, where they're eating, pushing up feed, stocking rate. I'd say a big challenge in the UK is there's more variability in the forage. Most of the forage, it was alfalfa, lucerne, silage, but the majority was corn or maize silage. And maize silage, as most people know, is a bit more consistency to it. We still test it at least twice a week on dry matter intake, but I think that's a big challenge in the UK with the multi-cut forages, but it's an opportunity too. And the reason why I liked monitoring the dry matter intake and getting the fertility right, because I kind of, as I help manage some of these herds and some expansions, you get this thing called the upward spiral, as we called it, where you know, you get your fertility right, your diet's going right, you get shorter days in milk, less fat cows, less metabolic disease, then you get a better transition. You've got control in your cull rate, so you're not having these involuntary culls. You know, your cows are cleaner then because they're transitioning better, they're more fertile, and then you go back to the top, and this thing just keeps getting better and better. On the other hand, though, you can get the opposite. If you've got excessive fat mobilization from a thin or fat cow, you just got too much fat moving, you get more of this inflammatory state affecting the immune system. Then you're susceptible to ketosis, milk fever, retained placenta, all those common problems we know of. You get your cull rate gets hard to manage, you get a lot of involuntary culls, then you get poor repro, and again, poor repro, longer days in milk, cows' body condition score is hard to manage, and you know, this kind of exacerbates.
So they're all linked, and there isn't one single magic bullet, is there?
No, I mean, it's focus and details really is a big part of it. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a challenge, but it's just all those details add up, was my experience. So yeah, you're probably wondering what a pomegranate's doing up there, but this image is really used to reflect what's happening in the ovaries of the cows. So they have these follicles, they're like little seeds, if you will, which all, you know, females are, mammalian females are generally born with what they're going to have, and then they just take it in turn to grow, become dominant, mature, and then they release the ovum for the sperm to fertilize. So it's all about keeping these healthy, and they need a healthy background of hormones, progesterone, and different things, and not too much of this pro-inflammatory disease or state you get with too much fat mobilization or immune problems. Because if you run into that, then you get the follicles don't develop properly, and you get problems with ovarian development. You get, you know, things like cysts, which are hard to manage. They result in cows showing too much heat, not showing heat, and in between. Really, once you get a cyst, to use a football analogy, it's as useful as having a minion on your team, because they're very frustrating and they just don't follow the book at all.
Okay.
Detail. So obviously we had advantage of being able to look at stats, but really just wanted to reflect on some of the things that you may take for granted, but are you drilling down in enough detail? Semen handling is a big one. It's, you know, the water temperature, the time in, how many straws you handle. We probably did handle a reasonable amount of straws. We had a gun warmer that we'd plug in and keep it at a certain temperature, which was a bit more extremes of weather in the Midwest US, so that was really useful. Looked a lot at sires. I found a lot of variability in beef sires. Again, we were lucky to have numbers to help analyze this, or larger the data set. But because our heat detection rate was fairly consistent, I would look at return rates, and if return rates were looking worrying, I would just stop them until the conception rates come in. But those things just all add up. But probably the biggest one is just the ability. Is the right person able to get as much pregnancies as you could get? You know, is their conception rate as high as it could be? Do they need retraining? Is that just them? For example, you know, if you score a goal, doesn't mean to say you're going to be the best striker in the team and you play up front. You know, and sometimes a ball can bang off your head and go in. So it's just getting that right person in the right position. And the other another area that really I wouldn't have thought, 10 years ago would play a big part, but it did, was genomics, the advent of genomics, and how we dealt with fertility on that.
Okay, we do just have a question that's come in, so we'll take it now, I think.
Yeah.
It was just clarifying about the days in milk. Is this the period by which cows are milking and should be cycling before we try to inseminate?
Yeah, so days in milk would be how many days after they calved. So our voluntary waiting period range probably from 35, 40, some herds around about 70 days in milk for the voluntary waiting period.
And do people do their voluntary waiting period based on milk yield?
No, purely on days in milk.
Okay.
We didn't do any difference in how we treat it, the reproductive programs or breeding for yield at all.
That's good. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, just on the genomics, this was one thing. This is like 7 years old now, but this was a herd local to us that had started genomic testing before we did. And this is the preg rate diagrams for their herd. But what they've done is the daughter pregnant rate, if you see on the command line, GDPR, so that's the genomic value for the equivalent of the fertility index. So they just took a halfway point in the herd, 1.9 below and above, and looked at the difference between the preg rate. And you can see the bottom right corner of each one, it's 21 to 28. So that's a 7-point difference purely on not treating them any different. That's just looking at what their genomic info was telling us. So, and that made me kind of think, well, maybe we should look at this for our repro. At the time we were using BST, that's not really used apart from like 2-3% of the US herd then. But it did make reproduction a bit more of a challenge, and that we were looking at different advantages, ways to get advantage then. And I always felt that with a lot of the reproductive health kind of traits, there were very low heritability. I always felt, well, they're not really worth focusing if they're, well, heifer conception rate, I'll go through in a minute. In the US, it's 0.01 reliability. So it's, you thought you better things to focus on. But I learned that heritability is a ratio. So an environment's a big feed into that. So what I'm trying to say is, if management isn't your bottleneck, you can really make a lot more progress and help the selection intensity on reproduction. So just to give an example, this is from Zoetis. They took the GPTA, so the genomic predictive transmission ability for heifer conception rate, which is 1%, very low. They analyzed that in 200 heifers, grouped them into 5 groups, 40 in each. And as you can see from the graph, if you look along the red line and look at the right-hand side, so that's the average GPTA for heifer conception rate in the group. And it ranges from 2.1 at the highest to minus 1.6. So that's, 3.7%. So that's half. So you double that, 7.4%. So the conception rate should range about 7.4%, where in actuality, if you look at the blue bars, from 38 up to 25%, they're 63, sorry, so that's a difference of 25%. So what I'm trying to show there is that even though it showed itself because of the management wasn't a bottleneck, there's really big improvement in heifer conception rate on genomics. So that was, things like that give us evidence. So what I ended up doing was using, I believe in genomics, and most of our sires were genomics, but for low heritability traits, I wasn't afraid to put in a proven sire to correct that low heritability trait. An example is, Manchester United have just put in Ronaldo. He's a proven striker. He's going to do the job. You definitely can rely on it. So that's, again, I don't think, despite my faith in genomics, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting a proven sire in to correct some low heritability traits like reproduction if you need to.
That's really useful to know, because we need to make sure that we're breeding the right kind of cow for our system, don't we? And then manage it appropriately.
Yeah.
Okay, we've had another question come in. Sorry. It's
no problem.
Will a cow giving 50 litres hold to service the same as a cow giving 40 litres? So I suppose it's a case of, is that extra milk yield going to be a problem?
It entirely depends. It depends on so many factors that there's no reason why it shouldn't if you've got some things right. High yielding cows do give you more of a challenge in that they're putting more body reserves and things to milk production, maybe creating more insulin resistance as they direct. They have to put that glucose energy towards milk production. But if you're managing things, there's no reason, and there's very, very high yielding herds with very high repro. So I would say yes, you can get equally as good reproduction with 50 litres as 40 litres.
Good,
and
thank you.
Didn't change our attitude of doing it, really.
Okay.
Young stock is another area where you can just improve that selection intensity for reproduction and for other things. As most of you will know, your genetic potential, your highest genetic potential is in your young stock. Similar to having an academy for your football team, it's just that balance between having the right amount come through. It's a slow payback. You know, you're feeding them for a couple of years before you really get any payback. But one thing I did see a lot of herds run into in the US was just getting those numbers wrong. Sex semen, even though commercially it was first available in the UK, I think as a wide adoption, it's probably it happened a little earlier in the US, and there was a lot of herds running into difficulties by just having too many heifers on site and feeding them. And it's just important to make sure you're doing your kind of number projections and that you're not carrying too much stock, because obviously there's a big feed bill behind that as well. I think heat detection is likely one of the areas I think that in the UK there's a good scope for opportunity. Again, this is a very hard thing to manage consistently. You don't have the focus of a block calving season, so you need to be focused all year round. What we did was a tail chalk, and again, you need, so obviously chalk on their tails, but there's so much secondary signs and skills to do that you need it. It was almost my job was to find the right personality to do that role, really. And because there's just, you've a lot of cows to get around, you need a system of making sure you're noticing every cow every day. I think in the UK, there's traditionally, picking 3 points of time for an hour, half an hour, and observing. I think that's extremely difficult. We've all got pressures of all herd size on labour. And when the first herd I managed, I decided, after going around in the morning, mid-morning, I was going to breed my own pen. And I had to give it up because there's just so many distractions. So as well as the time allocation, you need to focus. You need to make sure that's all you're thinking about when you're in there. Obviously picking lambs and any other things you see, but all you're thinking about is the cows and looking at signs, because it's just too an important job not to focus on it.
It's very specialist then, so the tools that you use are only as good as the person using them. You need the right training, you need the right aptitude.
Yeah. And from people running dairy that maybe don't have as much labor on their dairy, you've got silage and you've got all these different things to do that you can't, it's very difficult to focus. So it is a challenge on mid-sized dairies when you don't have that division of labor. It's a challenge on any size dairy, but I can see where if you're relying on yourself and you're doing everything else to do heat detection, so there are other options. You can't do that is, you've got the different semen companies that offer breeding services. That's one option. A bigger one now is my next point, is the automation. I've been impressed, particularly in the last 5-6 years. You've got like Cow Manager, SCR, kind of some of the NEDAT collars. This new generation of wearables is really improving and seeing very good rates. So if you're not able to dedicate the time, then you really need to be looking at some of these newer generation tools. They're also getting a lot of synergy with the data produced, and I think in the next few years, machine vision is going to be very interesting as well for this space, and just all of them working together as well.
What do you mean by machine vision?
So just detecting things from images, like video camera images, that area's been. I'm doing, for disclosure, I'm doing some work with a company that is looking at that, but I think that it's just an area that is going to be interesting in the next few years.
Definitely. Okay, so that is a case of if you're struggling for staff, the quality staff, and you're trying to multitask yourself, then make use of this automation to help you with this job.
Yeah. So the new generation collars and activity monitors they've got more and more impressive. We looked at them several years ago and just didn't think. Well, one is just the adding wearables to larger herds is it's a challenge as well. But I really think they've improved a lot in the last 5-6 years, and I've seen that on several dairies where they're really doing a good job. But the issue is none of them can be 100% for some of the reasons we talked about the ovarian cycle, and these cows. I think a dry cow probably has about 1,000 litres of blood going through her liver every hour, and when they're lactating, they're at least twice that, so over 2,000. And that's where your progesterone, which you need to get those follicles growing, and estrogen, which shows the heat, get metabolized. So just sheer dilution, they're showing heat for less as well. So that's why you don't always get to see, we're seeing less and less times of heat, as well as just cows not showing as strong a heat as they used to. That's where using some pharmaceutical intervention can help, using your sync programs too. So I'm just going to go through the ovarian cycle briefly to give everybody a refresher. So there's your uterus, cervix here. Then you go into your uterine horns, uterine body and the uterine horns, and these are your ovaries. So the ovum's dropped, it's caught, and it's brought down into the horn where the sperm fertilizes it. This is your ovaries. This is a sagittal, just a cut through view, ultrasound, and then your diagram. So what happens in the ovary, sorry, I'll just take a drink. The follicles grow up, become dominant, become mature, they release, and then they turn into this corpus luteum. You might hear your vet talk about CL. That's one of the things that helps produce the progesterone. So again, your follicle releases the ovum, and then this follicle just continues to form the CL, which helps with the whole hormone situation. And then that regresses and another one grows up. This cycle takes 21 days to complete. So what I'm going to talk through, like most of the staff I work with were Mexican, Guatemalan. English wasn't generally their first language. And also some of them were very clever but didn't really have the opportunity for education, so just used different ways to communicate the ideas why they're injecting this and what the sync programs were doing. So used football as an analogy, as the play grows up to get a goal, and similar to the ovarian cycle, and these follicles mature in to become dominant and releasing the egg. So I picked on Blackpool, but if you're a team, you got to beat the defense. You got to get through, beat the offside trap, or your play needs to beat the defense if you want to score a goal. Similar to here, some of your plays, you need a defense to create your plays, same as you need that progesterone level to grow those follicles. Some of them make it, some of them don't. You break down the defense and you can score. So going along the bottom, this is your 21-day cow cycle, and these are your follicles. So if you look at progesterone as your defense of the other team, progesterone comes up, your follicles start to mature, which some become dominant, but you need to break down the defense, and that's called luteolysis, to have that ovulation, a goal scoring opportunity. So what you'll see used for these interventions is progesterones, your CEDARs or your PRIDs, GnRH, that's your acygon receptor, etc., and then prostaglandins, your estromate, prosolvin. Off-sync is one of the classic ones. So what you do is you inject GnRH a week later, then you inject GnRH, you form a CL. A week later, you help break it down, and then a couple of days after that, you get a new follicle, mature a new follicle, and then you've got a chance for your goal scoring opportunity, ovulation, pregnancy, etc. If any of these are the latest sync programs in the US, so here's off-sync on the 21-day cycle, they're doing a double prostaglandin, so day 7 and day 8, and that's to really help break down this defense, because they're finding off-sync was first started 20 years ago. Cows have moved on, and initially the original study, they did use a very high dose of prostaglandin, so they found better results, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit, of using this double prostaglandin. Also, the problem with looking at the 21-day cycle is you don't really know where the cow is. It's not going to tell you what day it's on. So the best conception rates are around this 5 to 12 window, when there already is a corpus luteum formed. This is from Constantini and their group, and really these graphs are showing as conception rate along the top here, color coded without a CL and with a CL. So if you've got a CL at the start, the conception rate's higher. The time of prostaglandin, it's higher, and if you've got it in both, your conception rates are considerably higher. And also, so I'm talking about breaking down that defense with the prostaglandin. when you release that last, when you mature that last follicle to ovulate. So again, conception rate here. Now, if you look, this is progesterone very low, and then it gets higher. So when it's very low, that defense has been broken down. So conception rate is higher. So that's why in the US, if I just rewind here, to get in this clear window, a lot of people have went to double OVSync. So they'll do an OVSync just to fix the days really of the cycle, and then they'll start, and generally been roughly between that day 5 and 12. And that can also control twinning to some extent, because you've got less of these double ovulations if you've got your progesterone levels controlled. But you know, that takes a lot of labor, a lot of cost with the pharmaceuticals as well. So I would look at, you know, these sync programs as set pieces in football. You know, you need to be well organized, you need to know what you're doing, but they should be part of your play. I wouldn't want to rely on them 100% to get my pregnancies and get my results.
Okay, is that a good time to give you a couple of questions again?
Yeah, sure.
One is, why do cows not show active bulling after prostaglandin injection with a good CL? So,
why do they not show active? Well, again, going back to this, they brought in this double prostaglandin here, day 7, and then added a day 8, because they just felt they weren't getting the luteolysis, they weren't getting the disappearance of the CL that they wanted to. So there's a few different theories as to why that is, but yeah, they're just finding these higher yielding cows. The refractory period of the time is not always, you're not always sure why. Also, it depends how you're identifying the CL. If you're doing it by palpation or ultrasound, you get a bit more accurate levels on ultrasound. Again, some of these cows, going back to the dilution of hormones, they just may not be shown for that much for that long. So they could have come into heat, they could have ovulated, but you're just not seeing them.
Okay, and the other question is, how can a vet tell that a cow's coming into heat when they see a CL? How do they know which follicular wave they are on? Oof,
It's
that's
very
a
difficult.
complicated one. Yeah.
It is. It's very difficult. If I've got a good breeder, I want to just let them make the decision. We track some where the vet at another dairy predicted when they were coming along, and the conception rates were a bit disappointing. So it's challenging. If you've got a good skilled breeder, I tended to leave that to him or her, really.
Okay, thanks. Good.
There is, in theory, there is a way to predict based on the site, you know, the ovarian cycle. If I go back to, you know, the diagram, but in reality, I find that it wasn't very accurate. It's not all cows read the textbook, I suppose. So yeah, just give a couple of real life examples of people that have used different levels of sync and heat detection. So this was just some of the guys I worked with within our group contacting me because they were having a bit of, I called it friendly competition. Their family, they're managing 2 herds and worked with both herds, knew them quite well. So herd A was doing a tail chalk, what I call a backdoor off sync. So you tail chalk them for a couple of cycles, and if you don't see them, you put them on off sync. Preg rate was good, 27, vulnerable waiting period about 40 days. Herd B were in a similar system but changed this double off sync. Their preg rate was 32, their voluntary waiting period was 70. Well, the first thing is when you correct the voluntary waiting period, say you equalize them to 50 days, their preg rates were pretty much the same. So even though one had the bragging rights for the preg rate, they were the same when you correct them to the voluntary waiting period. So this is a graph, dates along the bottom. This is when they changed to the double off sync. So you see this graph shows their days in milk. The red square represents the days in milk at the first breeding. So 35-40 was their voluntary waiting period. Then they changed. A few of these odd ones are new cows that were enrolled with a pregnancy, so just ignore them. But look at that 70. If you look across that 70 days, very solid block. So that's when they had their first service. So that particular herd, the herd B that was using the double off sync. So this is the percent of herd pregnant. This is their pregnancy risk, really. So 100 days in milk, it used to be the target of 50%. in calf by that. Then the new one is 60. I think you should be pushing, trying to push 70. But this 100 days in milk, they were 61, to 62. So very good. Herd A that was using the tailed chalk were actually even a little better. So they had nearly 2/3 pregnant by 100 days in milk. So really, even though one was higher on preg rate, they both, were doing very well. But knowing these two herds, herd A was a very well established. The guys have been breeding, some of the guys that have been there have been breeding for about 14, 15 years. And herd B was a fairly new herd, not well established kind of herds people, and they were expanding as well in the local dairy, so moving some staff. And to be honest, for those herds, these particular procedures they were using were correct and the right ones to use on those herds at that time. So just an example of using those tools to suit your individual needs, where your herd and management levels or attention, if you've got a lot of other irons in the fire at the time, what you need to do and what tools you can use are quite different.
Okay, we've got several questions for you now, so we'll just take them as they've come in. Any tips to reduce the incidence of silent bullers? Somebody's heard that high maize diets can cause it.
Yeah, again, I feel that some of that which is difficult, is just that fluctuation in feed intake. Just controlling that nutrition as best as possible will help to get those healthy. So that follicle needs that highest level of progesterone and other factors to help them develop properly. So just reducing those cysts, that kind of area. So and obviously it's that upward cycle. The more you can, if you really focus and drive fertility hard, combine that with good nutrition management and just general, can just help get that cycle, so eventually you get less of those.
It's really important then to get your nutritionist and your vet working as a team, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, when using the pre-sync and serving from that before enrolling on the off-sync, would it be worth double jagging the cow with prostaglandin then?
Yeah, so double jab as in 2 days in a row. Your luteolysis does, so you're making your CL disappear basically, will increase a little bit. It's just that balance between labor. A lot of people use that pre-sync for helping to clean up. There's some arguments over and how much it does. Again, I think those other management factors are just as important. If I had to swap one, I would really still focus on the dry matter intake and that nutrition side, to be honest, because you get them going right, then you don't have to rely on that for the heats and clean up as much.
Yeah, which leads to the next question. Any pushback on the use of hormones in the USA as yet?
I seen BST when I first went over was quite widely used. Within a few years, it was all out. And then I moved to Iowa, South Dakota, and it was still in there, and then it was reduced because it was in cheese. And yeah, the public pushed the BST out. As far as the reproductive hormones, I think because if you're using it as a tool, I mean, it's obviously very, very widely used in humans, and I think it's a bit more acceptable. But in my mind, it's good to rely on the natural heats and use it as a tool when you have to.
So have we got an opinion for the UK? Have you seen anything happening here about the use of hormones?
I think there's some contracts are limiting it, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And how did you calculate the correction for the voluntary waiting period?
What do you mean the correction for preg rate? It does that when you put it in. So depending on what program you're using,
okay,
it really, because it's how many eligible heats there are, so it doesn't really count. So if you're using extended voluntary waiting period, so you're not breeding to 80, 90 days, well, suddenly you've got all those eligible cows coming in that people would have been seeing between 40 and 80 days. So it really focuses them instead of spreading it out over longer time. So once you start recording your preg rate, it looks better. I'm saying it doesn't look better, and it is what it is, because you have achieved it. But when you compare apples to apples, you should put them on the same voluntary waiting period.
Yeah, good. Okay, so thank you very much for your questions. Please keep them coming in. We've got another 20 minutes, and Niall's going to move on to staff engagement and management.
Yeah, I mentioned dry matter intake is second hardest to staff engagement and management, and that's probably the hardest part of, well, managing any business, I guess.
Yeah.
We ran I suppose, a scheme, a respect scheme. So it was respect with respeto in Spanish, and focusing on the main areas of safety for the person and respecting other people, animal handling, and the equipment and the environment. And at a time, when I was there, initially mostly Mexican labor and Guatemalan labor was widely available, but even before the last president, before Donald Trump, there was a lot of pressure on immigration. Birth rate in Mexico was dropping. It was dangerous and difficult for guys to cross the border, and there was just a lot of pressure on immigration. And it was really good to see, positive to see. As a result, people put a lot more emphasis on staff, which we all should have been doing from the start and always should do. I think it definitely pays, and I've seen the benefits of it. At that time, Jurgen Klopp, went back a few years ago, or even today actually, Jurgen Klopp and Gareth Southgate are known to be very good people managers, and they both have a similar philosophy of, they're friendly, but they're not their best friend. They'll tell them things they don't want to hear, and if they're not fit for the team, they're not able for the team, that they don't get to play. And the bald one with them both is my brother, so it was really good. He worked quite closely with him in that period, just to learn how they were with people, how they manage people as well, to get them to buy into them, to get them to buy into their vision of where they wanted to go. One really interesting point was when we did some work for one of the industry pharmaceuticals on just handling down cows, and the staff that they were made in this animation, the ones that helped develop that were extremely engaged in helping to train that. They took real ownership of it, so it really brought home the value of just getting people engaged in the protocols, helping them to almost co-develop it. So we started doing some videos for new employees, but getting our current employees to help direct it, and that really helped just to foster the culture. And again, a lot of them, English wasn't their first language, so some of the learning materials were pictorial. Some of them were extremely smart, but just unfortunately didn't have the opportunity of education. So we had to, have a mix of materials and how to learn as well, and that really helped the engagement too.
Did any of the farm owners ever give their staff English lessons?
Yeah, we did. Quite a few did. We rolled a program. I think in hindsight, the first time we did it, it was a bit too intensive, because they work long days, and we put on lessons afterwards, and we probably put on too much. So we learned to not have them as frequently, but there was very good uptake in it, and yeah, it worked out very well.
Because there's not just the language barrier, but there's a cultural one, I understand. There's a different culture down in the south of America to the north.
Yeah, there is and there isn't. It was mentioned a lot there, but I work very closely with Amish as well. They raised our calves. Initially, I went down and thought their culture was very similar, but I think we build some of those cultural barriers ourselves. I mean, we all want the same, they're all working for opportunity for the next generation. And I kind of felt it's better to focus on the commonalities. I mean, I went over to the US. I didn't know any Spanish at the time. I mentioned a few footballers, and I started speaking to the Mexican guys. But then I went to watch an American football game with some of my American friends, and I realized I had a bit, as much in common with the Mexican guys as because I still don't really understand American football. I enjoy watching it, but it's a little different.
Okay.
But yeah, so a long answer to your question is, I think we should focus more on the commonalities rather than the cultural barriers, I suppose.
And it's interesting that you say that just because you can't automatically communicate with foreign staff, it doesn't mean they're stupid. You've come across a lot of intelligent people, perhaps who are educated, or maybe just can't communicate it, or they've not had the benefit of a good education.
Yeah. I mean, my youngest son's got a rare genetic disorder, and he's not close to nonverbal, but he can definitely get what he wants. So I think yeah, the communication thing is, it's it's there, but you can definitely get around things, and it shouldn't be a barrier at all to helping to get that effective management and getting the engagement.
Okay, so why are we showing pictures of people with food then in this one?
Well, we made an effort just to clean up, their eating facilities, changing facilities, the housing we had for them. I understand the UK employee housing is a bit more of a challenge just with the general cost of housing, where that was a bit more of an advantage in the US. But all those steps to keep things, in a likable environment for them really helps. Another step to help engagement as well. Animal handling, that was a big one. We brought in this training called, it's like low energy, low stress training. So no shouting, no whistling. You could carry a cloth in your hand. That was the only thing. So just respecting animals and how they were treated. And you could definitely see a good culture when you go to visit other dairies and things. You could assess the culture quite quickly. And I really was a big, I was really thought that was a really positive thing that we did, and just no tolerance at all for anything other than just treating animals with respect as well.
No alkathene pipe needed.
No. And then equipment. So we ran a program of just training on equipment. Interesting that I'd say most of the bobcat kind of skid steer accidents we had after we tracked them, the first 3 months was surprisingly low. And I think part of that was the people were nervous, they were new to driving it. And then 9 months and above, or a year and above, was fairly low as well. It was that in between phase when they were confident enough, they knew how to operate it, and then they started to speed up. So we started running trainings in that kind of interim period, and that helped reduce. It's very frustrating when you're walking around in the morning, you see things banged into. That was a difficult. People make mistakes, but you also don't want anybody to be careless and doing it because they think there's no consequences. So it's that balance of getting people engaged to treat the equipment and machinery with respect, and also flagging up problems as well was another one. That just not being afraid to report any issues to supervisors as well.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because really good stock people aren't necessarily good at machinery. But
yeah, and we were fortunate to have that division of labour again, and the scale you could have. You could kind of group people accordingly. Sometimes it took you a while to figure out, but like this guy in the photo, actually, he's an excellent stockman. He knew how to operate the equipment too. He was one of those rare people, but he's a very good stockman, very intelligent. And lastly is just the people engagement or appreciation kind of parties, events, taco parties, which I enjoy too much sometimes, and birthday parties and just Christmas parties. Actually we did it after Christmas usually, but every year we'd run a very big raffle, so big prizes, and that really just helped keep the engagement and the kind of community atmosphere.
Can you remember on your 8,000 cow herd how many staff you would have had?
Well, we had it was a 3,000 and a 5,000, so it roughly on the 3,000 it's roughly 1 to 100 and it gets a little bit less when you go up to that 5,000. So some of these larger scale dairies maybe run 1 to 120, one employee full-time equivalent to 120. It's hard to get away from that 1 to 100 without a lot of automation. I think that's a fairly common benchmark, I would say, in the US. We really needed to increase automation to get the number of staff down, and I think we're all finding that in the UK as well.
Because that's a lot of people management rather than just going checking bulling cows yourself and doing the AI, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the idea is that those people doing the bulling should be better than I could ever do, because that's they're focused on it, they're doing it, and
yeah.
Some of the challenge was some of the people that, particularly reproduction, I would say the elite guys and girls with good conception rates were probably could sometimes be challenging, because they like things in order. They've got the very repetitive kind of personalities and maybe not team not all the time, there's exceptions obviously, but I found in general some of those elite ones could be harder to manage, but obviously got very good results as well.
Specialist skills, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I have to put a picture of jerseys, but
yeah,
about half the herds were jerseys and half were Holsteins. Jerseys definitely weren't getting 11, 12, 13, 14,000 litres, but
no. That's good. Okay, we do have another couple of questions. One of them was, can you possibly give some indications of why this farmer's getting so many cows returning to service between 28 and 32 days? Are there sort of any headline suggestions there, what might be causing that?
28, 32. Well, one possibility is, you can get early embryonic loss. So if you remember when I showed that when the ovum goes up, the sperm meets it in the horn, it floats around for 7 or 8 days. Say it implants about 7 days into the wall, so it doesn't really get the signal to start again. If it doesn't, if it dies or doesn't implant properly, it gets spat out, or reabsorbed, but it doesn't get the signal to start again. That signal is delayed. So sometimes if you're seeing those delayed signals, you can be suffering from early embryonic loss. Other things is just, your ovarian health isn't as good. So you're not, you're getting cysts problems and just other areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's something to check with your own vet and start asking questions, investigating. Yeah,
like there's different infectious diseases, BVD, etc., can cause early embryonic loss. So it's good to check with your vet and make sure you can look at your inter-service intervals. They can you can dig into the data a little bit to see if there's any more clues as to why that could be. But that would be one area.
I think the number crunching is really important in a modern herd, finding your fertility results and then going back through them and saying, well, what we're doing well, what's not so well, and why.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big thing. I mean, you don't want to get analysis or paralysis by analysis where you're just because you can see so much walking around, but that combination of looking at the data and knowing the staff and getting out there is very important. Obviously, I had to hone in and did realize how important people performance and engagement was in all this. But yeah, all areas are important. The data really definitely helps.
Okay, somebody's asking, would you recommend a straw policy? So for example, if with a good cow you want to breed a replacement from, you'd have 2 straws of sex semen, and then if she doesn't hold, move on to beef.
Yeah, you're better obviously breeding your replacements from your best genetics. Again, taking into account you want to get a balance right of replacements, not too many replacements. So we would have, we color coded our genomics into quartiles and then bred appropriately with embryos and, well, mostly with sex semen and beef semen and some embryos. But okay. Yeah, definitely would now sex semen is really similar to those wearables. That's why there's a lot of opportunity, I think now, because sex semen's really improved. The wearables have improved to get those to do things like that. So do a couple of sex semen, and it obviously depends on where your conception rate, etc., is. But focusing on getting your replacements from your higher end cows helps your selection intensity.
Okay, so we've got a question here which is looking back at your synchronizing. When using 2 pre-sync JAGs, 14 days apart, and serving off the second one, is it worth doing the first one?
Again, linked to where you don't really know where you are in the cycle when you start, the idea of doing 2 weeks apart is just, when you get to the second one, you've got a CL really. So that's the purpose of why people would do 2.
Okay. Did you see any issues with mycotoxins in the USA causing poor fertility?
It's a good question. I think mycotoxin, if it smells bad and it looks bad, it's bad, is the way I went with it. I didn't feed any mycotoxin binders and didn't see the effect of fertility. I'm not saying it didn't, but I think it's one of those things that can be very easily overdiagnosed, or if you can't find it, it's got a vague or a wide array of things it can cause. But yeah, it's a difficult one to assess all the time. There was some, we did get in corn, we could run into some vomitoxins and things in the corn if they were stored right. So because we fed a very high corn diet and byproduct corn, there was some years when we had to be careful. But as far as, you know, looking at it as a silver bullet, I looked at all the other management stuff, people, nutrition, those other areas first.
Okay, this might be a bit of a loaded question. Are Jerseys miles in front of the Holsteins in terms of fertility?
It's obviously someone that likes Jerseys. I would have said 10 years ago, or probably more than 10 years ago when we first started with them, yes, they still are, but they're rapidly decreasing because they're in the US anyway. They've slowed down a little bit, but if you look at so about 20 years ago, they recognized, you know, we were breeding for milk up until I think it was 2002, the upturn started where we were indirectly breeding for fertility and Holsteins whilst pushing for more milk, and that was uncoupled. Jerseys are still the base. I think it's still ahead, but there's definitely a decrease because if you look at the equivalent of fertility or similar to fertility index daughter pregnancy rate, the bulls available in the last 10 years were negative, whereas in the Holsteins were positive. So there's definitely the Holsteins have got a lot better, I would say. So that was a clear answer 10 years ago. Now it's not as clear. I think Jerseys are still more fertile, but we need to keep that fertility in the breed.
Okay, and somebody's got a service time of about 9 o'clock every day and says they can't really change it. Is that, how much of a disadvantage is that?
I think it's not if you're consistent and you're capturing all. I've seen some very good results breeding once a day. Some herdsmen we had that like to breed a little bit in the afternoon, and if it helped their engagement and helped them get that extra few, I was up for it. But if you're a good heat detector, you can get very good results once per day.
Okay, I think final questions are coming in now. What percentage of cows would you expect to need pharmaceutical assistance to conceive?
Again, you can get that as a target, really. On Jerseys, when we started, it was very, very few. It was tiny percent, you know, 2-3%. I'd say Holstein herds, you know, you might 10% or so. But again, I think it depends on where your strengths are, where your business is, as far as what time you got for heat detection, what tools you're using. You know, if you use some of these newer generation wearables, you should be able to pick up a lot. And you know, if your ovarian health, etc., is good, so you may not need, you know, hopefully you'll get 10% and below. But again, I would say use it as a tool based on what your needs are then.
Because there is a cost attached to it as well, isn't there? It's
Yeah,
not
definitely.
just
Labor, you know, labor is a big, apart from the injection cost, labor is a big cost.
So if we can get the basics right, then you should set off that good upward spiral.
Yeah, I mean, I was a lot happier when we were very low percent, having, you know, 2-3% having to do it. That's what you want, really, because it takes, you know, you want to, it's one of those, there can't be any cows left behind when you do it, so you need to track down those cows you can't find, and cows you can't find are frustrating. So yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question that's come in. Somebody's asking about the views on the advantages of using a sweeper bull. Is that something you would have used in America?
Years ago there was some bulls we used to, but yeah, since sync genomics, sex semen came along, I don't think they've used any there for, well, in the group I was with for about 15-16 years.
I think it tends to be more of a, you definitely see it on the block calving herds. Once they've had their period of AI, they turn the bulls in. There's pros and cons of that, I'm sure, with handling and feeding the bull and checking his fertility status as well. Yeah, and
lameness was a big, most of the ones that we fertility tested, I could tell when they were walking up, you know, the lame ones, they were very poor, and they're on a higher, you know, with their on lactating diets, on a high energy diet, they're on their feet all the time. So we found keeping that rotation of bulls is very important, but lameness was a big issue with them.
Another last one, what's the ideal average days in milk?
Get it as low as you can. You know, you get 120 or something, you're getting, you know, the closer you can get those peaks, generally the better. As I say, there is some, you know, if your first lactations, you have a lower, flatter peak, so it's not as crucial, I think, to to breed them as quick as older cows, but you know, the quicker you can get them bred, the better. If you've got, people often talk about, well, they're complaining that they're drying cows off at so many litres, but I feel that's a bit like my friends at school used to say how much they won in the slot machines. They didn't always tell me how much they lost. So it's just getting that emphasis of getting them bred quickly.
Looking back now, what would you say the key things that you learned and remembered most about the fertility work over there?
I think getting on that upward cycle, because you know, it takes a while to get, but you're keeping the focus up, keeping the, you know, the dietary, the nutrition side right, getting the, whether it's yourself and employees, getting that engagement and focus right, using the tools strategically. I like the balance of using the tools, mostly heat detection with some zinc if you needed it. And yeah, again, it was just, if you keep that focus and get after it, it becomes easier. It's one of those things, that upward cycle then suddenly becomes easier. And otherwise you often spend a lot of time chasing your tail because you're on that downward cycle. So
it's something for people maybe to tackle next year, coming to the start a new year, new plans, and just say, right, we want to get hold of this. And
I tackle it today with it. You can't take a day off with replay.
Good. No, that's really good. Well, thanks. It's been really interesting. Thank you
no,
all
thank you.
for all the questions that everybody's been putting in. I think you did really well to tackle your brain there and answer them all for us. And thanks for your time, everybody. You will be sent an email with the link to this to be able to watch it again if you want to share it with other people in the team or staff. And of course, we'll ask you to register if you wouldn't mind for the vote. And also we'll send you a feedback form and links to our resources about getting high yielding cows back in calf. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.